Master Yacht and Master Tso visit the pub. Maney was at the pub talking to one of the perfect idiots, and the poker players had just left. In came two men, one who was awkward, with dark brownish hair and a blue and white striped shirt. Another was larger, with a white beard. Earlier that day, on his car ride home, he spoke to his guardian angels and guides as usual, and, also as usual, invited them out to the pub with him that evening, where he hoped to see Ray and Peary. He told them again that he believed he had identified who Master Yacht was, and then said to them, "I reiterate, I invite you out to the pub, and perhaps we can raise the vibration together. I'm not sure how exciting it would be for you, but the invitation stands." The two men who just came in sat next to him. To his right the blue and white striped shirt man, colors of love and light, to his immediate right, and the larger man to that man's right. And they were talking quietly about someone. And the man to Maney's immediate right started clearing his throat. And Maney started thinking about him, and came to a possible realization. The man in blue and white cleared his throat, at least 4 times. "I know who you are," said Maney telepathically, leaning back. And then the man in blue and white quietly said in a low voice, looking down, in a way that Maney easily could hear, "How are you?" And Maney gave a single, silent nod, seeing the man looking at him out of the corners of his eyes. After a moment, the larger man talked about how he was up until 5:30 a.m. in the morning and couldn't sleep. It so happened to be that this is precisely how Maney came to work, for the first time, late at his most recent help desk job 2 days ago. When Maney finally woke up that morning, he simply laid in bed and ended up being 45 minutes late for work. Peary then walked in, for it was Thursday at 9 o'clock. When Maney greeted her, she said she was well, then walked a few feet away and called him baby. This was not typical. The two men then left, having been there for only 10 minutes. After they were gone, Maney asked Ray who were those two men that just walked in? And she said she wasn't sure, she'd only seen them one other time. A few minutes later, Maney asked her what they drank, and Ray told Peary his question, and they discussed something for a moment. Then Peary said 7-Up and Scotch and water. And then Maney was all the more intrigued because he believed the two men were actually Master Yacht and Master Tso, respectively. Master Yacht was over 700 years old. Maney once asked Yacht, "So when's your 800th birthday?" As far as Master Tso, he once gave advice to a bard that Maney and Tso both knew about the proper way to drink Scotch, namely, to keep pouring water over the ice after drinking a glass, savoring it slowly. "What strikes you to the core?" asked the Tibetan master. "The belief in heaven and hell," said the student. Master TB's eyes grew watery. After about 10 seconds he set down his cup and walked away in silence and left the student alone. All alone. And this was his home, alone again, the student thought. His mouth was cracked downward. "Is there anything else?" he said. And tears streamed down from his eyes. "Ray is happy and surprised. Is Wenna still going out with the army dude?" "Oh, no," she said, clearly surprised, and with a newly happy smile. That was a long time ago. That particular phrase seemed to be a bit of a stretch to Maney, who knew that they were considered a couple about 4 weeks prior. Man thought about Ray's response. Was she happy that she just realized that he didn't even know Wenna was single? Was she glad to hear that it was a simple misunderstanding that was keeping Man back? Recently, an older woman was hitting on him, and had been on several different occasions. Ray had asked her how other things, implying her efforts to win over Maney, were going. The lady's response was, "Not good." Ray replied, "Yeah, I've got a friend that's in a dark place too." At the time, Maney thought she was talking about Joe, but would later realize she was talking about Wenna. In any event, it seemed that Ray would like it if Maney dated one of her bartenders who liked him. Peary talks into her hand. It was a couple weeks since he told Ann Juice that Wenna had scattered his mind when she stood in front of the jukebox. Since that time, he didn't know what to do, He had no strategy, so he didn't go out to the pub when she was working. It was a Wednesday. Peary was bartending. He sat, by himself, in front of the cash register. He didn't stay long, had a couple rounds of vodkas and shots of Jägermeister, and then paid off. No one was there to talk to him. When Peary was standing in front of the cash register processing his tab, she picked up a smartphone and looked into it. She had her hand cupped in some way, and somehow as a result, her voice echoed back towards Maney in an unusual way. Usually when the bartenders spoke quietly toward the mirror they could not be heard, but this time it was different. He swore he heard the knoll following from Peary's somewhat lower voice, in a way that was almost monotone, as if she were reading quietly with her thick glasses on. "Maney, you're so hot. I really want to fuck you," she said. And then, more quietly and softly, "I love you." And then she put the phone down. Did he really hear that, or was he going insane? Again. If Maney wasn't completely insane, the question that begged him was this: who was speaking to him? Peary, Wenner, or Joe? After considering it, he determined that the most likely scenario was this: it was Wenner, chatting to Peary through the phone. Maney knew that those two talked to each other and asked each other advice. Wenner said this with her own lips once. And in this case, Peary went along with what Wenner said because Peary cared about her and Maney both. Maybe Peary felt the same way as Wenner? Maybe she didn't mind if Maney ended up misinterpreting the message. And it was also quietly and quickly done that it was impossible for Maney to be certain what the real communication was, rationally, if at all. Were those Peary's words? Right before all this happened, Maney gave Peary his card, saying thank you authentically. She responded quietly, almost as if under her voice, with the slightest hint at an authentic melody in the dry mood of the pub that evening. "You're welcome." Peary had poured 2 more drinks in front of him while he was nervous. He was wondering if she knew if he heard what she said, whether he perceived her message. He looked off to the left, toward the windows where the parking lot could be seen below the blinds. After the transaction was completed, Peary went down to the far end of the bar to talk to some more of the regulars. Man left in silence. He pondered these things during his walk home. He was aching inside and considering his thoughts carefully with much feeling. And he was also careful what he broadcasted around him with those thoughts. The next day, Maney changed his mind. He was now convinced Peary was talking on her own behalf. It was prompted by the way he thanked her that night, with extra care. Her response was extra real and full of feeling. He was leaving early, and he didn't see her use her smartphone all night until she looked at it just when he was cashing him out. He was overthinking it again, and he loved her, and he was sad. But then the day after that he changed his mind again. Why did she sound like she was reading? Why was she looking at her smartphone when she said those things? And didn't she say, "Maney is so hot," instead of "Maney, you're so hot"? That's what he thought she said originally, but now he didn't know anymore. Wenner, after all, was the one who once said to Peary, right in front of Maney at the register, "Tell me I look pretty." And Peary replied as if a robot, "You look pretty." Was it Peary or Wenner? If it was Wenner, this barrier in communication and the lengths that these ladies seemed to go to never initiate direct communication was far more elaborate than Maney ever imagined. The next Friday, Maney was at the pub to see Perenisa, and to his surprise, Wenner came in at 9 to fill the evening shift. Immediately, though never directly at him, Wenner said, "Boo," when she was a couple feet from Maney. Maney pretended not to notice, because he didn't know what to do. 2 more times that night Wenner would say, "Boo," in front of Maney. But he still didn't know what to do. He was uncomfortable, but worse yet he was feeling colder and colder, because he felt like he wasn't opening his heart. By the end of the evening, while Maney was talking to an older woman Diorna about Christianity, Wenner's boo s became boo s. She did that twice before Maney paid off his tab that night. That evening and for the next few days Mainie's heart grew very heavy. The situation had reached a crisis point, and something was going to happen because things couldn't remain like this. The next Wednesday he went to see Berenice again. The pub was more empty than full. While Manie was sitting down toward the back of the bar, Piri was in front of the beer fridge and she said, when is Lisa's last day? And the regular said next Tuesday. Then suddenly Manie realized, he had one last night to attempt to relate to Wenna before she left his life forever. It had to be about him. Who's replacing her? Berenice asked the regular. Manie believed Piri may have already known, but was saying all this so Manie knew about the fact that Wenna was leaving, gone. Joe, and then the new male bartender, the regular responded. Manie noted to himself, he can't go to the pub on Tuesdays anymore. I hope he's a stalker. Piri then said loudly, strangely. When Piri finally had a free moment, Manie asked her in a low, sullen voice, why is Lisa leaving? After a second she said, I don't know. And then she felt compelled to add to her answer, and said, she got a job. What was her job again? She asked the regular again at the end of the bar near the beer fridge. I don't know. Some bank. That's all I know. A little later that night Piri, with a somewhat concerned look on her face, said to Manie, I think the daytime work schedule will add consistency and stability to her life. I hope so. Anyway, sad day, she said when in front of Manie, a minute later. He reflected on how a couple weeks ago she had done something similar right in front of him, out of the blue, except that time she said, sad. So sad. Later when back over near the beer fridge, right in the middle of another conversation she was partially involved in with that regular and some man Manie didn't know at the corner of the bar, she yelled take advantage of her. Out of the blue, to no one. And then a minute later she yelled she makes a lot of money. And the stranger said who makes a lot of money? As Piri walked away from them, back to the cash register, not responding to the question. Did Wenna really just want to have sex? Did Piri really want him to take advantage of her? Or did she know that this would be the gateway for Manie into her life which he would only enter if he thought that the financial situation would not be too straining? Was this something Piri wanted for her friends? The great angel, he was mentally exhausted after a brutal day. Not only was he strained emotionally because of the Wenna situation, a surprising event happened at his current help desk. Here's how this state of affairs came about. About a week ago, he was led by his team leader and manager into a conference room and was advised that he'd plateaued and wasn't meeting their expectations. He had 30 days to vastly improve or they would have to let him go. The main reasons were inability to multitask, inability to remember issues from 2 minutes ago, inability to consistently consult the knowledge tree, like Eve, and as a result, complaints from IT. Manie said he'd start looking for a new job until they let him go, because he was already doing his best. What you see is what you'll get, he said. And he went about looking for another help desk. But they caught him by surprise, letting him go only about a week later. He was about to be let go, but it wasn't because he was having altered states of perception or going crazy, it was because he wasn't female. When he entered the bar that evening, he had to sit next to Diona, who he liked, but she was angry about a bank invented to Manie, whose nerves were already shot. Manie waited and waited, for nearly an hour when Berenice showed up to do late shift. The bartenders had to change their tills and exchange information, a process that typically took about a half hour. Manie waited until his moment of chance. He was finally by himself at his favorite place, right in front of the register. Piri, can I ask you a favor? Before I leave, can I talk to you about Wenna Lisa? She said yes, but it will have to be a couple minutes. No problem. After a couple minutes went by, she came back. What's up? She said. It doesn't have to be now. Whenever the arrangements are good, he said. He was implying there were too many people around him, and the conversation wouldn't be private enough. After about 15 minutes, when there was fortuitously no one near him for many chairs on both sides, she came over and looked at him. "The arrangements are about as good as they are going to get," he said. Then, in that moment, the eagle sorceress became a great angel. She had white feathery wings that went 5 feet up and 10 feet out, and they were not outstretched. They rested lightly on the floor. Her eyes were turquoise blue, soft and watery. She was wearing light bluish purple. She looked deeply into Manny and listened. He began to speak, and they talked for about 15 minutes all in all. They exchanged the essence of pure love with each other, and they could feel it. That night she enlightened Manny and lifted his spirit and his heavy heart. Manny told her about Wenna and his predicament, and said that she, Piri, had been indirectly giving him messages encouraging him to take action and get into a relationship with Wenna while he still could for the last few weeks. She acknowledged the accusation and said yes, but what words did I use? Then immediately, all of the communications Piri had been sending had an entirely new meaning. She had been speaking in code, but even the code was in code. For example, when she was saying "I really want to fuck you," and take advantage of her. And she makes a lot of money. She was pointing out what Wenna's real motivations were. When she was saying sad and so sad, she was conveying that it was sad that Manny felt rejected and unlovable as who he really was. She was also talking about the sadness that Wenna felt. She then acknowledged that Wenna liked him, and during their talk Piri seemed to validate many of Manny's perceptions. Piri's perspective was now illuminated to man, and it amazed him and felt like a crepuscule. She had trusted his ability to not only perceive her coded communications, but also to read deeply into them and their implications. Manny said that with men, he was like a wise man. With women, he was like a 3-year-old. He said that he adored women, but when they were single he was terrified of them. It's always been that way. He then told her the story of when he was little and he hid under a lounge chair. If that gives you an idea of how small I was when his sister's friend's little sister was going to come over with their family. She then told him about how a little relative of hers was extremely fond of one of his friend's older sister, and he would stare at her, unmoving, from a distance. And when Manny thought about this story, it reminded him of his crush on Terence's older sister when he's a little kid. Piri later said that Manny's mind worked on a different level than most people, especially at a place like this pub. Manny laughed. She said that the part of Manny's brain that he was using was in a different area than most people. She compared him to a theoretical physicist on a popular situation comedy at the time. She said Manny needed to find someone like the similarly nerdy actress who was on the same show. Manny said he always liked her. When it was time to pay off, Manny said, "What percentage tip do I owe you?" And she said, "Don't worry about it." And he said, "I'm poor." And he gave her an ordinary tip, which he thought was the greatest expression of his love at that moment. Perenisa was the Saint Petra of heaven. She held the keys to its gates. After Emmanuel returned from the second rehab, he was banned from heaven. Or, at least he thought he was. He couldn't remember if he was told that or not. He was afraid, because one night when he was particularly depressed, he thought he'd done something truly horrible and may have been told he couldn't drink there anymore. When Ray told him "I can't serve you," he thought it meant she could never serve him. So, one afternoon he called the pub and one of the bartenders answered, and he asked if he could drink soda water there. And she said yes. After that time, he would only drink soda water at the pub. Sometimes he would have a couple shots of vodka and then go and have soda, and then walk home, drink more vodka, and go back. Once during this time, the stork's boyfriend commented that he was glowing one afternoon, after a couple shots of 99 bananas and a soon-to-be hug from the stork. He was glowing because he had figured out a way to drink and be at the pub, and he felt home again. Around that time, when Manny had a job again and started going to bars, he would get a shot at one bar and go to the pub. Then, he'd get a shot at another bar and go back to the pub. He alternated where he drank and would drink soda water at the pub, proper. One afternoon he was talking to one of his friends at the pub who thought it was ridiculous why they didn't let him drink. And Manny said, "I know. I've been trying to show that I'm okay when I drink." And Perenisa was bartending and she overheard this conversation. The next day, when Manny went back to the pub in the afternoon, Ray was there and as soon as he sat down she said, "Can I talk to you outside?" And Manny said, "Yeah." Outside in the sunlight, Ray told him, "If you're going to drink, we want you to drink here. But my bartenders can cut you off at any time. Do you understand?" "Yes," he replied. And they went back in and Manny was allowed to drink again from then on, except for a few years later after Jo made clear she didn't want him to be there while she worked. Peri had told Ray what she heard and observed, and in this way, she was the Valkyrie with those great white wings and a golden sword, lifting Manny's dead body back into Valhalla, the gate unlocked. On another afternoon even farther in the past, Manny had gotten accidentally locked outside of the pub in the patio. In this way, she fulfilled a prophecy. Petra unlocked the gates to heaven twice for Emmanuel. When as last Tuesday night? It was when Lisa's last night bartending Tuesdays. She would only be seen again on every other Friday, and every fourth Sunday except for football season, every other week with Jo, so that was out. Manny made sure he was there to give fate one last chance with the possibility of he and Wenna getting to know each other in a real way. Regi was there. This was the man that she butted heads with once, even though they liked each other. They were since on good terms. He had a parrot on his shoulder, this is true. And when Manny asked what the parrot's name was, and this is also the God's honest truth, Regi said Manny. April was also there that night, recently married. Shade was there too, and Cariara Fozera. Manny talked with Wenna this evening, he paid attention to her. Later in the evening, Mia wanted to play music, and when she was near Manny she started running to the jukebox and said with emotion, "Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God." Manny turned his head and looked right at her from 18 feet away and she was looking right at him and there was emotion all over her face. And his heart leapt just then. And then Wenna joined her and April said, "Yes." Anything by that band as Wenna selected songs. In the first song that they played on the jukebox, the singer was asking over and over why the person they wanted couldn't be their lover, and that it hurt to be without them, but also in their presence. And before the evening ended, Wenna went over to Mia and said, "Breathe, April. Breathe." When Manny went to pay off, he said, "I'd like to stay, but I don't think the next bartender, Jo, wants to see me." Wenna made a subtle half smile as she looked down working on her bartending, as if trying to hide it. But Manny saw it. When Wenna tried to pay off his card, she said, "It's declined." Manny said, "Try it again." And she tried sliding the card again, and she came back and said, "It's declined." Manny said, "You know, I don't always believe you when you say, it's declined." When he said this, he used his fingers to indicate that those two words were in quotes. "I know how much is on there," he said, and he could see Wenna pause for a moment. Then Manny said, "Okay, try this one. I've got a bunch we can go through." And he handed her his debit card this time, something he didn't want to tap from at that particular time. And it went through. Manny paid off and said thank you, hopefully I'll see you soon, and left. On his way walking home, he could feel emotions in his chest, neck, and head. He also felt a strong sensation of energy throughout his head. Something happened just then. Manny never saw Wenna again. It was said that she was fired for drinking on the job, something he'd never seen her do. The door creaked as Wall walked into their home. Only this time? Gray was up. "How was it?" the older man said. "It was good." The man in Wall lied. "I mean, it was pretty good," he told the truth. "Good, millimeters home," Gray replied. Wool took off his wool and laid it down near the wooden table to his left. Then he went into the kitchen and got out the vodka and poured it into a glass. He noticed the smell of their place, his senses awakened by the alcohol. "Noel, want to listen to something? I just picked this up today," Gray said, walking slowly out of the room. He came back about 15 seconds later, producing a vinyl record album. "Got this at the music store." After Wool got his vodka, they walked into the living room and Gray began to meticulously take the record out and place it on their vintage record player, "Something Gray found at a garage sale once," he said. Gray moved at about half the speed of most men, Wool reckoned, as he sat down in an old cloth-covered lounge chair. The music began to start. It was strange music. Nothing Wool ever heard or remembered hearing, or did he? They sat in silence for about 10 minutes, and then tears began to come out of Wool's eyes. In no time at all, he began weeping, silently, and Gray was smoking a cigar. This went on for about 15 minutes until finally Wool got out of the chair, got some more water and vodka, came back and laughed. Gray smiled and nodded, and they listened to the entire album while it spun. Wool could see the music spinning upward. He could see it transparent, expanding as it lifted, invisible in the room. "And I'm seeing everything. I'm feeling everything. And I'm missing everything. And I'm loving everything," Wool said. "I know that song," said Gray. Wool looked at him and paused, then nodded. Silently Wool listened to the record spinning these songs without words. "And I remember everything, and I remember everyone. Somewhere, somehow I will find you." The smell of the petrichor was coming through the cracked window now, and the smell of Gray's ashtray and the cigar that was finishing was filling the air. "I'm home," Maney said. "I'm home," he said, and looked down. Another 2 tears came from his eyes as Gray sat in silence. 20 seconds went by. Gray slowly stood up after setting his cigar down in one of their large ashtrays. Lightning flashed from the window as he moved toward the record player. Maney's head began to bob slowly as he listened and sipped whatever was left. Suddenly there was sound from the old speakers, a crackle, as Gray turned them on. An old song began to play, but after a few seconds there was a sound as if someone had put their finger on the record. Gray stood motionless in front of the player and the sound began to slow down. Slowly it then seemed as if the world began changing, reverting to something familiar, something incredibly forgotten. After a pause, Maney too stood up and walked over toward the window. He looked back and didn't remember the grandfather clock that he saw in the corner behind his chair, but it was as if it had always been there. He then continued to walk towards the window that had the rain touching it, but it was as if he was walking through water. Everything was in slow motion. When he finally arrived at the window, he looked out and saw the darkest darkness. He saw something that preceded dawn, over vaguely seen hills and woods. Then the blurry sound happened again, and the music started up again, very slowly, and then stopped again. A lightning bolt started to strike, and as soon as it did, the record player muffled deep and stopped again. As Maney gazed out of the window, white electricity descended from a dark cloud in the distance and lighted everything up. All held still, without motion, as if time itself had stopped. Maney could see raindrops from the storm. He could see them all frozen in the air, like teardrops, refracting into every color. "I stopped the clock," Gray said, sounding as if he just lifted a snifter and was about to have some scotch. Maney's eyes reflected the light from the falling water. "The world stopped," Maney said with a smile, but no words came out, as if he was in a dream he couldn't wake up from. Somehow, he could see Gray behind him as he slowly released his finger from the record with his right hand as he took a sip of the scotch. Maney then saw the raindrops begin to move, slowly at first until they gave way to the speed of gravity, until he couldn't make out each raindrop individually anymore. "Get away from this place," Gray said, his voice deep and clear, but fading. The light from the window grew brighter and brighter, and the skin on his face got lighter and lighter until it was almost pure white. and then he heard a sound like the beginning of an explosion. Whatever happened next was wiped from his memory, and he was never sure how to find this nameless place again, to this very day. Remember? I love you. I love you. I saw you breaking apart, and I was worried about you. You're breaking up. I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I love you. You need to go home and go to work, she said. I'm sorry, you're breaking apart, she said. And then she closed her phone conversation and started to march back to the bar. But Maney said, Jovastana, can we talk? And she said, I'm sorry, what? And he said, Joe, can we talk? And she said, okay, just wait until I clear out my customers. And he said, okay. And he waited 45 minutes, smoking and going back and forth to the patio, to and fro, and finally she came out and he said, I like to people watch. What do you think about the idea of you and I walking together, at the shopping mall, you and I, just talking and observing, together? And she said, oh, no, I'm not interested in that. And then he looked down, and said, I'm in hell again. And in these days of drinking, not one but 3 hells were made and unmade, and each reflected the hells contacted by the help desk, consecutively. 4. About a month after Joe's phone conversation under the cold moon that spoke to radios and moths and islands, on the night he heard a woman's voice yelling, go now. Joe told Maney, I never, ever want to see you again. And this time, I'm never going to change my mind. Second, and on the very same night, Annie told him, you're not my friend anymore. And this time, it's forever. And third, Carrie also on the very same night silently deleted herself, leaving Maney's chest cold and queasy amuck with forever and never. She told him only these words, I'm not your friend. She, the one who once said that he was like her brother, who when she hugged him he would laugh from his heart. She, who also did the look thing, where you stare at someone for 1 second indicating interest, and then look away fast lie. He had burned candles for all of them on more than one night over the years, wishing them each peace and joy, sorry if they'd ever be sad. These hells also corresponded to past, present, and future, respectively. First hell was past, for it was no longer real. The second hell was present, for total deletion can only exist outside of the context of time. The third hell was future, for it was yet to be endured. Joe, who he thought felt most familiar, could never be seen again, and she would never be. Annie, who his soul loved, completely disappeared. Carrie, who Maney longed to know, would never actually happen. After observing all of this, Maney felt a sense of hopelessness, and a searing pain shot through his back to the left of his spine as if by an icy cold knife. He then saw an image of her with her blonde hair and summer shorts and once giant black sunglasses in his mind. She was now wearing uncharacteristic very tall brown boots and was standing behind him. As soon as he realized the pain he felt in that moment, he never saw her or heard her voice again. Save. Please God. Maney wept in his heart. And he left again and walked on time-worn beaches. Alone. Lost. Why? He saw a life, a revelation, and a dream unwrap into nothing. Then he saw the observer of these things and do. Man breaks apart. His heart into a million pieces explodes, and the pieces heralded out at the speed of awareness, creating another universe, and outside of the universe there were 2 or more empty rungs of empty space, and these were the places where, when attempting to gather the pieces back, one could fall a mighty fall, and he remembers all over again. The quadruple null set that prevented the absolute deletion of the everything. I love you sweetie, she said, and she kissed him on the forehead silently, and invisibly. I love you, I hate you, I want you, I miss you. And the dog was diligent, and the dog was dutiful, and the dog was faithful, and the thou was everything, and the thou was no thing, and the thou was all and both, and the quadruple null set preserve that endearingly, endlessly, imperfectly, start, shut down, shift, delete, return, document, end, control, alternate, down, cancel, save, exit, return, control, alternate, up, document, escalate, de-escalate, restart, close, somewhere. Somehow I will find you, symbol. After many months, Jova unexpectedly appeared seated at the bar, at the far end of the room, drinking there with a regular. It shocked Manny to see her as he walked in. Immediately on this strange Wednesday night that slipped in between ordinary days, she called out loudly, "I'm in hell. Oh my God, don't judge me." Then, she announced that she would be playing a song that everyone around her needed to hear. She stood up, walked to the jukebox and said, "It's the country song. If you hear the country song, that is mine." She played her song, which was next, and left many credits behind her afterward, saying that they were for anyone to play songs. The lyrics were about loneliness and how she wanted to heal someone. The lyrics said their heart was turning black and that they were sorry for the way they caused pain and made someone else walk away, that it wasn't their fault. It said that they wished that someone wouldn't go away. And then, in her boots and with long brushed brown hair, she quickly went. Heading toward the south, she disappeared somewhere over the blacktop into the night, under the parking lot lights. I dreamt a bar for apocalypse.